Hey everybody, welcome back to your Full Crew Newscast. I'm Don Zolda, your host today, CEO of P3 Tech Consulting and publisher at Autonomy Global. So great to have you all with us. We are focused on the topic of security today, and we've got some amazing articles and guests, of course, to discuss those articles today. We'll be talking about privacy in terms of drone security and how that's going, especially with autonomous patrols and law enforcement. We're going to talk about governors that are urging Congress to take some action on drone threats. And finally, we're going to talk about a CNAS report for investment in counter drone technologies on the defense side. To talk about these important topics today, we have with us three amazing experts. So we're going to go around the horn and have them introduce themselves. I'm going to start with retired United States Air Force Brigadier General Houston Cantwell. General Cantwell was the vice superintendent at the U.S. Air Force Academy when I was the head lawyer there. Just ran into him recently. So it's so great to have you on the show, Houston. Go ahead and tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
Awesome. Hey, Don, it's great to join you today. Thanks so much for the opportunity. This is going to be a really important discussion. I'm super excited about drones. So although I started out flying F-16s in the Air Force, about 20 years in, I transitioned to the larger drones. I flew MQ-9s for a few years, led the counterterrorism efforts downrange. And then most recently, I was an RQ-4 pilot for NATO, where we actually watched the Russians, sadly, invade Ukraine. We had them on our sensors and watched that. And as you see from the news, with the strikes going on in South America, drones are in the very forefront of our national security. And I look forward to today's discussion. Thanks so much, Don.
Absolutely. And General Cantwell is a senior resident fellow at the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies currently. So thanks again for joining us today. Next, I'm going to go to Tom Keary. Tom is the Automated Operations Manager at Titan Protection. By the way, everybody, if you haven't seen the Drone in the Box parody video, go watch it. We had Ryan, CEO, on the Dawn of Autonomy recently. So it's great to have you, Tom. Can you tell everyone just a bit about yourself?
Sure. Thank you for having us here. I am a retired law enforcement officer. I did 26 years in law enforcement here in the KC Metro. The last 4 years, I supervised our drone team, helped write most of our training, and did most of our prep work on that as we were moving towards DFR when I retired, but not quite there. And then after retiring from the PD, I got this opportunity to come help Brian get the drone as a service security platform up off the ground, pun intended. And I've been working in the drone space for 5 years now, counting my time with law enforcement. I also have my CPP from ASIS International. So I've got the law enforcement security and drone combination that we're trying to bring into the private world. Basically, we're doing DFR for private companies.
I love that. And DFR, for everybody that might not know, is drone as first responder. By the way, we are live, everybody. I just wanted to mention that as well. So jump on in the chat and let us know where you're from and if you have any questions. Okay, last but certainly not least, we've got Curtis Walters. He is with Echodyne and great radar company. Curtis, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So Curtis Walters here. I've been working with Echodyne for 4 years now, so it's been nice. We have radar technology that enables good and proper use of drones in DFR programs, as well as detecting nefarious, bad actors with drones. I came from a software background, actually cybersecurity. So what's been interesting here is just watching the evolution of the drone threat from its infancy to now. We're in this, sprint phase overseas where we see, just swarms of autonomous drones. And what's interesting is, in my early days, I was trying to sort of, relate cybersecurity to physical security, and it's evolved into that where we have artificial intelligence technology. We're looking to baseline what we know, what we don't know, trying to identify needles in the haystack, bad actors amongst, all of the positive and good and proper use of drones. And so evolving our technology, enabling our partners, helping to educate law enforcement resources as well as others in critical infrastructure is what we do day in and day out with this understanding this threat that's just out there that we see day to day in our defense teams, and how can we enable and help folks here domestically to protect against that threat.
Well, amazing. Thank you all for being here. And also, while I'm on the kind of the thank you train here, I'm going to thank our sponsors, without which this show would not be possible. Roland's Consulting, we've got Grand Sky and End State Solutions. So thank you guys for supporting our efforts and allowing us to continue the show. And by the way, we've got Bill Schultz out there in the audience saying good morning from Phoenix. Good morning, Phil. Thanks so much for chiming in, and keep those comments coming. So let's go ahead and roll with our first article. And this one, I believe, is Tom's article about autonomous drone patrols starting to become a thing. So Tom, tell us about this.
Yeah, so this was a blog post from ACLU where we got mentioned alongside some conversations they've been having about the drone as first responder. And as I said, we're basically trying to do drone as a first responder for private companies. We're working in car lots and manufacturing, data centers, those types of spaces. And we have a nationwide beyond visual line of sight waiver, which means we can set up these operations quickly and be where we're needed. But obviously with more cameras, which basically drones are, cameras that can fly, privacy is a big concern, and it's been something we've been very mindful of from the beginning here. So I actually appreciated the shout out that we did get for recognizing the concerns, and we are addressing them. And there are some manufacturers out there, software in particular, from one company that actually sets up a virtual blind around the property line. So you're not even looking outside of there. One of our sites is right near 2 apartment complexes, and we're very mindful that we're looking at where we're supposed to be patrolling and not looking anywhere else. And so obviously they have concerns about the number of law enforcement agencies going this way. I personally believe that DFR can change law enforcement for the better. I think the same thing can be said for physical security aspect, in terms of being a force multiplier, keeping people safe, more safe encounters, and more, easily accessible data when you need it.
Yeah, 100%, Tom. Thanks for sharing this article. And I think Jay Stanley was the author from the ACLU. I actually met Jay a number of years ago. We were on a panel together at Duke Law. General Dunlap he's in charge of the Duke Center for Law, Ethics, and National Security at the law school there. Always raising valid points. I mean, you have to have an open mind. At the time I was in the military, and, everybody's concerned about, oh, you guys are doing training. Like, what information are you scooping up? Don't be following cars and lasering in on people's license plate numbers and things like that. So, when you think about drones, I think the big 3, I always call them, are like safety, security, and privacy. And this article is all about privacy. So I'm going to go ahead and go to Curtis next. You read this article, you hear what Tom had to say. What are your thoughts on this?
I agree. I think it's a great concept. We work, as mentioned, with DFR programs with law enforcement, and it's a complete game changer. So whatever we can do to help enable that, to prevent, folks going into harm's way with better situational awareness prior to doing that. I'd love for it to have that everywhere. At the moment, right, some of the challenges are, and I'd love to hear more about the blanket waiver, but from a radar perspective, we're frequently involved in obtaining the appropriate waivers to shoot radar, as well as enable the drones in DFR airspace. And so how do we all work together to make sure that that's a simpler process, so that all law enforcement agencies and private sector security companies can take advantage of this technology versus being limited by some of the laws that are in place today. And it kind of bleeds into my article. It's just how do we work together to make sure that we can enable proper use without being hamstrung by legislation?
Chris, I have a question for you. When you think about the approvals you guys need, I know it's part of that is the FCC,
Mhm.
and I also feel like there's whether it's the ACLU or other civil libertarian groups, nonprofits, sometimes have a fundamental misunderstanding of the technology being used, and I know there are always concerns about privacy. In terms of radar, like just to kind of be clear with the audience, you guys aren't scooping up like personal PII, right? Personally identifiable information when radars are out there.
Correct. We're just looking for objects moving in the space. So in
Yeah.
this world, primarily, airborne objects, and then we're classifying by behavior what those are. We'll detect birds, we'll detect any object in the airspace, and that's potentially good and bad. If you're not classifying appropriately, you might, generate a false alarm that, if you're misinterpreting a drone versus a bird. But when you can classify appropriately and quickly, you basically can quickly detect the next new threat. So we absolutely do not sniff traffic or the control traffic from a drone pilot to the drone itself. We're just looking for movement in the airspace and then quickly trying to classify exactly what that is by the behavior, how they're flying, are there propellers, that kind of a thing. And that becomes very important so that we're not, there's no PII data, there's no user data. I can't tell who's flying the drone. There's other sensors that do that, and so we do not fall in that space.
Yeah, and before we go to Houston, we've got Ben Grossman out there. Ben has become a super fan of this show, and I think this question maybe goes to you, Curtis. Can you speak on the current state of cyber attacks on drones? Is that something you are focused on, and how are you addressing cyber attacks on autonomous UAS, USVs, UGVs, etc.? I mean, radar, like you said, helps identify the object to kind of classify what it could be. In terms of cyber attacks and protection against that. That's not something really any of you are focused on, other than maybe Houston from an academic standpoint. Is that right?
We actually do a bit. It's all about what is the sort of the near term threat. From a cyber perspective, I started immediately having conversations over here about that because if you think
Yeah.
about it, and maybe this is a little bit of a different slant than what Ben was asking, but a drone in use as a potential cyber threat, it becomes the ultimate IoT device that you're unaware of. So I can take a drone, put a solar panel on it, so I have unlimited power coming to it with Raspberry Pi with some software, and I can go and plop that on top of a data center and start sniffing for traffic. There's been instances of that. It hasn't been quite as prevalent as some of the kinetic threats to a data center, as an example, but it's absolutely a threat that's out there. And so we mention it. There's a growing concern. I think folks are more concerned about, a drone taking out power or with some sort of munition on it, blowing up a data center. But there's absolutely a threat where I can go and take a drone and plop and just start listening and sniffing traffic, just like any other cyber device that's out there. And it's absolutely a threat.
Well, actually, you just brought us full circle back to privacy, right? Because if a drone is sniffing information on the top of some building, it's grabbing all kinds of information, right? Some of which may be private, but oftentimes intellectual property and proprietary. We've seen this before. So thanks, Ben, for the question. Thanks, Curtis, for that answer. Houston, I'm going to go over to you. In terms of privacy and, drones, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's obviously a topic from a military lens. We haven't given it a whole lot of thought, especially since most of my ops have been overseas. Tom, I'd be curious your insights into what are the main differences from some of the parties that are concerned between webcams, because those are proliferating all around public spaces, and drones. How is that being discussed in your spheres?
Well, that's a valid point, and one I've kind of brought up as well when having some conversations with some people is the number of cameras that are already out there. I don't know if how many people actually realize how many cameras are already out there, and that the drones, it's a flying camera. I mean, one of the things, we push when we're, selling these is that it gives a vantage point that you can't get from any other camera. It can move. It's going into places that most cameras aren't already. That's the biggest thing. We've actually been contacted by like HOAs that are having problems in their common areas where they're interested in drone. And the first thing I bring up when I meet with them and I get in the loop is I have concerns about the privacy with this because, I'm not going to let a 5-person HOA board speak for 500 residents of an HOA. But then they tell me, well, it's this bridge and dam area we have by a lake where we're having problems overnight. Okay, that makes sense. So a lot of it is the conversations, but I also worry that people will say, hey, this HOA just hired a drone for security. Are they spying on my pool in my backyard and stuff like that? And that's what I want to be sure we're avoiding. And that's where, honestly, one of the biggest things is transparency. Being clear about what we do with the videos and photos we obtain from patrols, because we record our missions, and part of that is for transparency. So if somebody has an issue saying, hey, you were looking over here, we can actually pull up the trajectory of the drone and play it for them and show exactly what we were looking at the whole time.
Yeah, that's great. And I wanted to just kind of jump in real quick if I could. So for the DoD, I was actually involved in helping to write the domestic use of UAS policy that in 2015, President Obama signed out an executive order that basically tracked that for the rest of the federal government. And we use these intelligent oversight principles. And Tom, you've really hit on some of them. This idea, so it's collection, retention, dissemination. Collection, what information are you actually gathering? You talked about minimizing, right? Search areas through various technological means. Dissemination, like who's getting to see it, and retention, how long are you keeping it, right? So these principles, I think, can be adopted across the board, like in any agency, whether it's a company like yours, Tom, or like public safety. And the other thing I wanted to mention is some of you out there may know Brendan Groves. He works for Skydio, but he actually was a former Air Force JAG and a DOJ attorney. And he was really pivotal in helping write the NTIA's voluntary best practices for drones in terms of privacy. So I'll be writing an article about this. It's going to publish next week on Autonomy Global. I'll drop those links for people to go back and read these really awesome resources, but all still very valid. So good stuff. I want to give it to you, back to you, Tom, real quick, to kind of close us out on this article so we can move on to our next one. I think we could talk about this all day long, but we need to get to Curtis's article next. So Tom, back over to you real quick.
Yeah, it's real easy to fall into a 1984 type mindset when you hear about the flying, cameras and the technology's out there. And the amount of good that we can do with this technology, the difference we can make. We've already seen it where we had a situation where a trespasser, and before the officers approached, the drone had already detected that the person was armed with a machete. So,
Whoa.
Things like that really do matter and make a difference. So I don't like fear mongering. I don't believe 1984 was meant to be an instruction manual. So I believe the good we can do with this really will make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much. And Bill Schultz is mentioning, he agrees that education is one of the biggest things in terms of way ahead. The public won't be ready without that. So great comment there, Bill. Thank you very much. So we just talked about privacy. We're now going to transition more, I'll call it, to authorities. Curtis, your article addresses this about how governors are urging congressional action on drone threats. So I'm going to hand it over to you to tell us a little bit about this article and why you selected it.
Sure. So this is just a topic that's near and dear to us. This was an article, I believe, back in September that was published in October that was penned by Governors Jeff Landry and Josh Stein to warn Congress about the growing use of drones in a malicious fashion. We absolutely don't want to ban all drone activity because there's too much good that we can do with these devices. But just looking at what's going on around the globe, it is absolutely a growing national security threat to the U.S. And we've seen instances here, and they don't largely get broadcast. I had no idea before coming into here at Echodyne how prevalent, some of the nefarious drone activity was. But, they provided examples of, targeting power plants in Pennsylvania and Tennessee, major public events, putting public safety at risk. There's vast drones incursions, and today only federal authorities in a small fashion are able to actually mitigate. So that's the challenge. That states are attempting to build their own laws, invest in drone detection technology. However, they're overlaid by federal authority, which means I can't take down an aircraft. Drones are treated as a similarly to a manned aircraft, and it's not exactly certain how we can sniff that traffic due to privacy issues. And so one of the examples, and a number that was there that was sort of eye-opening for me, is that the FBI, they have the ability to mitigate. They estimate that they can only cover 0.5% of eligible special events, so these mass gatherings of sporting events and that kind of thing that they're involved with. And so this gap in authority, compounded by recent government shutdowns, leaves communities vulnerable as major events like the World Cup and Olympics are approaching. And I mentioned the government shutdown because there has been authority for federal agencies to mitigate drones, but that has lapsed with the government shutdown. So now we're in this pause where even those that had authority, it's not really legal for them to take down drones. So we're really vulnerable now. So the article calls for urgent action, legislative action before a disaster strikes. I would hate nothing more than for us, and that's what the governors here were depicting, is that if we wait for something to happen, then we're going to knee jerk into some solution that may or may not address the threat today.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, this cannot be more timely, just given, like you said, the lapse of the minimal authorities that existed already. And, Curtis, to your point, we've already seen like entire countries shut down their airspace to drones. I think it was at the UAE at one point, had some kind of an incident, and then they're like, all right, no more drones. I mean, that's not the answer. So, Houston, I'm going to go over to you next because, DOD has authority. Everybody thinks, oh, DOD has authorities, but those are limited. I mean, when you and I were at the Air Force Academy, under the definitions in 10 USC 130I, technically, right, the superintendent, the wing commander, didn't have authority to mitigate drones. We didn't fall in those cover entities. And as the lawyer there, I'm sure you, as the vice superintendent, that was quite frightening.
Yeah, super frightening. And that was in 2018. And then we all heard about the Langley Air Force Base incursions that occurred just like a year and a half ago.
Yep.
And nothing's improved. Even Department of Defense wise, the installation commanders don't have the authorities they need to defend very important military assets. So there's plenty of work that needs to be done there. Curtis, one thing I'd really be interested in due to your expertise with cyber, as well as obviously drones, the attack that occurred in Russia by the Ukrainians that used basically, like you mentioned, Internet of Things. They, connected to these drones through different means. Now the Ukrainians are using LTE networks across Russia. You're seeing civilian networks being used for nefarious activities. How are we going to be able to parse that? And how are we going to be able to come up with policies that allow the use of the commercial entities, because that's so important to the opportunity, the growth, helping, helping commercial growth. But at the same time, there's vulnerabilities there. How do we get at that? I mean, again, you've looked at this for so long. Give us some ideas, given your expertise.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, a layered approach, right? There's strengths and weaknesses of every sensor that's out there to detect this type of activity. And so, you mentioned using, public infrastructure, mobile network, right? Those drones become blind to certain types of sensors, but then other sensors can pick that up. And I think this constant evolution and iteration of, what is the next new state? The biggest concern and the biggest challenge I see is, we're looking for authority, we're looking for legislation, and they're introducing concepts like better training, pilot sites, and that kind of a thing. The challenge is this threat evolves daily. I mean, which you reference here, right? You can generate a program and some training around, you know, a slow moving single drone that's hovering over your critical infrastructure facility. But the threat today is a swarm of drones flying a couple hundred miles per hour, flying autonomously, communicating with each other. And so you have to iterate quickly. And it's not just a, you know, all right, we're gonna establish some test criteria, we're gonna establish, you know, a list of sensors that are approved. Like, we have to consistently iterate, because this, you know, these devices are, I mean, they change daily, and that's what we see. I mean, I think you probably saw the Ukrainians became very good at detecting drones via the RF signal, and so what do? They now fly with, you know, fiber optic connectivity to eliminate that. And so what's the next step there? Well, I need something that detects any object moving in the airspace. Okay, that might be radar. But now I say, okay, now I'm going to go detect every radar signal that I see and go and blow those up. And so it's this constant, you know, back and forth between mitigation and then how do I counter that activity. And it's just education and learning and evolving your solutions. And again, partnership amongst, you know, the sensor community, amongst the communities like Tom that are building out solutions in this world. And how do we share that data? You know, one of the things that we do as a company, not to tout ourselves, but, you know, we have a test plan that we consistently update that says, you know, if there's one thing we can leave you with, if you're not going to buy our stuff, if you're going to buy a solution, make sure you're testing against these known threats. And we update that pretty consistently with the state of the art these days.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And Tom, you know, I'm going to go to you next because, you know, you're straddling these worlds of, you know, your law enforcement expertise and then, of course, the private security arena, neither of which truly have counter UAS authority. You know, so as you're sitting there, you know, what are your concerns? What's keeping you up at night?
Well, the federal being the only ones that have the authority to act on counter UAS, I think, is one of the biggest loopholes we have, obviously. And I was glad to see the attention being brought to this. And, you know, like was talked about, you know, the good guys are always a step behind the bad guys, it seems. And that was something I noticed, you know, in law enforcement. We're always, you know, we come up with this anti-skimming thing and then they change it and then we have to change. And the same thing's happening with the drone world. And obviously we're concerned because that whole idea of a knee-jerk reaction, something bad happens, there's a knee-jerk reaction, and then all the work we're put in helping our customers gets grounded, you know? And so it is, that's what keeps me up. I know there's been some talks and efforts to try and push some of this authority down to, you know, state, local level. And I've gotten to see some of that at work. A couple of years ago in Kansas City here, we had the NFL draft, and it was at an outdoor area. I know DHS had some counter drone stuff in there that they put to use, and I heard it was, you know, really successful. But right now, they're the only ones I know that I could call to get that. And right now, I wouldn't be able to do that. So,
Yeah.
you know, counter drone is something that is on our radar very much. You know, how do you set up those guidelines where, you know, you want the good ones there, but how do you keep the bad ones out? It's like just about anything else where it's the equipment that makes it easier to carry out the acts. It gets really tough to regulate.
Yeah, absolutely. And no pun intended, we're talking radar. He said on our radar, and, you know, Curtis is a radar guy. But anyway, you know, what I was going to say is Ben had asked earlier about drone attacks and kind of where to find information about that. I would commend people to check out Defense Solutions website. They have a really cool drone incident tracker. You can, you know, put attacks, you can put critical infrastructure. It's got a lot of filters and it's pretty up to date, I believe. So that would give you an idea of the threat. But you know, in terms of authorities, look, guys, this is a drum I've been beating for a very long time. I mean, when I was still in the Air Force, right, 2015, a drone landed on the White House lawn, and everybody's like, how did that just happen? I mean, and here we are, you know, 10 plus years later, and we still don't have good answers. And in terms of at least legal authorities, and that's really troubling. I've written about this for Newsweek. I actually just had an op-ed in Autonomy Global about this. And, you know, when you think about Homeland Security as a concept, and I'm preaching to the choir here with Houston for sure. The DoD is not the first group to respond. We literally call our state, local, tribal, territorial, officers. We call them first responders for a reason. And when you look at pictures of 9/11, those iconic photographs, who's out there? It's the cops, it's the firefighters. And if we can't give them the authority to protect us, that's a problem. And there is a right way to do it. There is process and procedures, so this stuff is not abused. The technology is there. I'm getting off my horse, but Curtis, I'm gonna go ahead and leave this one to you to sum us up.
No, I appreciate that, and I think all of us in the community need to be vocal about this. It's a challenge because again, we want good and proper use of drones. So we want drones flying in the airspace for proper behavior, but we need to be able to quickly identify the bad actors with drones. And there's, remote ID is something that's out there, but bad folks with drones, they're not going to fly with remote ID enabled. They're not going to fly with a known signal. And so if laws aren't going to change quickly, let's get funding in the hands of local law enforcement so that we can begin to collect data. I think we can evolve and iterate, and maybe back to your question, Houston, like the more data that we have to sort of identify, okay, here's what the common state, here's what my known behavior is near my utility, my public utility, my substation, the bad actors start to stick out like a sore thumb. So even if I can just gather some data with sensors that are out there today, then when mitigation comes, I can just layer quickly on top of that system so I don't have to reinvest in that. And so, again, this article was a call for Congress to act. I think there's been some, executive activity there that's a move in the right direction, but we need laws, we need funding, and we need education out in the space. And again, community working together on this one. So
yeah, 100%. And of course, having the laws, you raise a great point. You need the money too, and that's a great transition to Houston's article, Houston. But before we get to you, two things. One is, once again, I wanted to thank our sponsors for making this possible. End State Solutions. We have Rollins and Grand Sky. Grand Sky is doing great things out in North Dakota, by the way, in terms of counter drone and kind of putting together a playground for counter UAS authorities with Project Ultra. So check them out. There's one other thing, and then we'll get to you, Houston, and your article about funding and kind of what the DoD is needing. Mark Ganong, is with the Nevada Test Site. He's commenting, another one of our super fans. Could the team comment on the difference between C-172 packed with fertilizer and a UAS equipped with a warhead? Okay, that's more to the threat question, but the difference between a C-17, maybe he's talking about packed with. I don't know.
Cessna 172.
Oh, a Cessna 172. I'm sorry. Okay, packed with fertilizer and a UAS equipped with a warhead. Is there even a difference there? Probably not. It's probably easier to use a drone to do that.
I mean, there's certainly a lot of similarities. You've just got one is a kamikaze, platform where you got a pilot guiding it to its final destination, and the other one probably an FPV drone doing something similar but preserving their own life. So I think there's a size difference there, which I think is very important because the Cessna is going to have a lot more punch when it finally hits its target, whereas current quadcopters, now 10 years from now, there's going to be quadcopters that can carry what a Cessna 172 can carry. But currently, quadcopters just can't carry the same kind of punch that or payload that a Cessna might be able to carry.
Yeah, absolutely. Low flow flyers, tough problem. That's where I think radar comes in, but we'll leave that to Curtis. But I want to get to Houston's article because this idea about the DoD, and a lot of people I think in the industry look at DoD as being a cash cow. I don't know that is true. And I think your article really covers the CNA report, or CNAS, report, calls for increased investments. So tell us a little bit about why you selected this and what we should take away from it.
Yeah. No surprise that CNAS, after do the research on counter UAS, are going to recommend, hey, we're underfunded and this is a very important threat. Need more investment in this capability. But before I do that, I want to highlight, I think it's always important to, when you talk about counter drone, divide it into two bins. We've been talking about the first bin, and that's domestic. And then the second bin, which is what talks about, is overseas combat operations. Certainly there's going to be some overlap between the two conversations, but there are also some very important differences that are unique to the different areas of operation. And so we're going to talk about overseas combat operations. And I'll tell you, I thought Stacy Pettyjohn and Molly Campbell did a really solid job of collecting what is the current state of operations. They had some really good examples of what has gone on downrange, whether that was in the Middle East or whether that was in Europe. Bottom line is that they highlight really that the character of war is continuing to change. But the United States, if I could sum it up, and this is kind of my own perspective on this, on their conclusions, is that although the character of war is changing, the United States, as you would imagine, is not changing as fast as it needs to. Now, this has had some implications. Number one, we've had to use, we'll call it systems like Patriot missiles or Standard missiles or F-16s armed with rockets. We've had to use legacy systems to try to stop what are these evolving new systems in the drones, whether they're Shahed drones or quadcopter drones. And the result has been some limited success. There have been lots of attacks on Army bases and Air Force bases across the Middle East, and the United States has stopped a preponderance of those attacks using these legacy capabilities and systems. But I'm sure most of you have heard about the Tower 22 attack, which occurred in Jordan last year, where 3 soldiers were killed and about, I think it's 60 or 70 were injured. So it was a tremendous and successful attack that occurred. And when they looked at why did this happen, you can see a lot of, again, similarities to what we talked about with domestic. There was a lack of awareness. The command and control had not been practiced as much as it probably should be. There was confusion between what was a friendly drone and what might be an enemy drone. And so you see some similarities between the domestic discussion as well as the overseas discussion. Now, what do they recommend moving forward? They recommend, obviously that we recognize that the character of war is changing and that we have to invest in these capabilities. Even though the United States has invested billions of dollars in whether it's high power microwave or lasers, these systems are not getting to the level of readiness where they're ready to be deployed in large numbers to have a significant impact on what's going on downrange. So they continue to promote, hey, we got to invest in these capabilities, because when you look at Russia, when you look at China, we're not talking about single digit drones. We're not talking about dozens of drones in the future. We're talking about hundreds to thousands of drones that could be threatening our forces overseas. And the current capability of legacy systems just does not have the ability to stop what is going to be a very significant threat to our future force.
Yeah, look, I was at the Aerospace and Cyber Conference, the AFA, recently, and that's where, Houston, you and I ran into each other again recently. I sat through, I think you were in that same briefing where they talked about how the F-15 Strike Eagles were shooting missiles at hundreds of drones over Israel, about a year or so ago. And I was just like, oh my God, like, that's crazy. Like, this is what we're doing, and how much money, that kind of asymmetric advantage on top of everything else as well. So just interesting times and a tough challenge, not just domestically, but of course for the DoD, as we see drones changing the face of warfare on the battlefield. Tom, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I know you're a little bit outside of this sphere, but like Houston said, there is some overlap, and you're watching what is happening downrange, and like, okay, those TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures can come to the homeland. What are your thoughts on these recommendations and this article?
Well, it would actually pretty easy to take those actions and bring them into the homeland here, even more so than most other equipment. You can go and get a bunch of drones pretty quick and easy, and they don't have to be big fancy drones for somebody who, knows what they're doing and as we saw and we've seen in the Ukraine and Russia, you can modify those pretty quick and then turn it into something that none of us want to see or deal with. So yeah, that's a big concern. And, part of that, yeah, we need to fund these abilities, but beyond the military bases, but for our infrastructure, defense, and all that, that also leads back into the previous article of who has the authority to use them.
Yeah.
And which really is to me, still an underlying question for anything domestic is, we need to have the authority to use some counter drone to avoid these types of attacks happening on our soils. I'm in Kansas City. We're hosting, World Cup next year.
Yeah.
We're one of the host cities, and it's going to be massive, and there's going to be a lot of people here, and that's a lot of opportunities. So, yeah, something that's very much, on our mind, but that's where we really need some actions from legislators and from the technology to get in our hands to, the trained professionals, get some more trained professionals to be able to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a great bridge over to Curtis, and really sewing up almost all three of these articles at one time. And then Mark Young's comment, I think there is a concern in terms of authorities, like, or even just with the DoD, that how do you identify a hostile intent for the rules of engagement? Like, that was something we were grappling with, in terms of defending the battlefield. I think people obviously have that same concern in terms of domestic use, right? And you're talking about a sensor, multi-layered approach, radars being kind of the backbone of that. So as you listen to Houston and Tom and these concerns, in terms of, like, look, what's happening on the battlefield could come here, how, and you, of course, Echodyne has experience with your technology on the battlefield. I do feel like we're at a point with the technology that it's solid. Like, it's solid.
Mhm.
I'd love for you to comment on that, because the authorities, the privacy, all of these things are floating out there. But where are we in terms of the technology? Is it there, and should we be funding it?
I believe it is. I believe it is. And again, I don't know that there's a single answer, but I think of sensors as sort of opinions of what we've talked about. Is it friend or foe? And better range, better accuracy, better certainty that it is a nefarious drone versus not. The question was interesting, right? How do you determine nefarious intent? Radar itself can get you a lot of the way there, but cameras, eyes on target with smart software, video analytics, right, to help with those decisions, because we don't want to live in a world of false alarms because you just ignore the system. But I do think the technology is there where we can make determination, we can detect these drones at greater ranges, which gives us more time to form an opinion, and getting additional sensors on target with smart software. So then we can take some type of action, right? You just don't have enough time with a Shahed flying at you. And again, this isn't my world, but I'm just, listening to others that have dealt with this, right? I need better range, I need better accuracy to do that. And I think from a mitigation perspective, we don't do that, but we partner with folks. And I do think you're not simply just using all of the latest cool technology like lasers to blow these things out of the sky. Certainly we can do that, but there are safer ways to do this, because one of the big concerns, World Cup match next year, there's 80,000 folks in a stadium, a drone's coming with some sort of package underneath it. How much range do I have? And I do think there's safe ways to take that drone down without putting the folks at risk, right? Because I know one of the biggest challenges is okay, we enable mitigation technology, but that drone falls out of the sky and falls on something, and something happens there, and what are the legal ramifications of that? But I do think there's good, safe technology, and we've experienced that with some of our partners, to take control of that drone, and basically have a safe landing of that drone far outside of the area where your constituents are. And I think it's there, and I think, again, funding for the research of this and more testing, better education, again, better resources for the first responders that are going to be out there is critical. And I do think the technology is there today.
Yeah, I think AI is a game changer too. I mean, we did just see some kid get jacked up. people thought he had like a gun. It was like a nacho bag or something. But, you know, as AI improves in terms of identifying specific threats, I think that's really going to be key. And I think we are at a different day, talking to you, Mark, out there, you know, than maybe when you were commanding the Aegis, you know, and your guys were just eyeballing this thing, to what we have now in terms of AI to help rapidly kind of, you know, help make those, you know, kind of identification calls. So anyway, really, really great discussion, guys. I mean, we are at time. I knew our time would fly again, no pun intended. You know, what an amazing show. Really appreciate your expertise. Appreciate the audience. We've got some great folks out there making great comments, asking great questions. Thank all of you. And of course, once again, last but not least, thanks to our sponsors and State Solutions, Grand Sky, and consulting, my brain. Here we go. Rollins Consulting. I'm going to be heading to Tennessee next month. Rollins is supporting that visit for the Tennessee AAM Symposium. So appreciate you guys. I'm going to give everybody just like really lightning round, like 10-second closer, if you will. Tell everybody also how to reach you, how to learn more about what you're doing. And then we'll just go ahead and close it out. In terms of what's next for us, next month we are dedicating this show to the theme of autonomy. So check that out, some more great experts. And tomorrow we've got Anello Photonics. If you don't know what a photonic thing is, dial into the Dawn of Autonomy and learn about that. So really great stuff. We'll go around the horn. We will start with Tom.
Thank you. Visit tpcsecurity.com to check out what we're doing with the drone, and see the look up Drone in a Box. Also, it is a great video, well done parody. And we're available for, you know, like I said, that drone is first responder for private companies, and we're excited to be involved. And thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Okay, Curtis, over to you.
Yep. Thanks for having me. You can reach me personally on LinkedIn, Curtis Walters. There's not many of us out there. And then Echodyne.com for more information about the company. You know, we're here to educate and enable folks. So don't hesitate to reach out. We're not just here to sell you solutions. We truly want to be a partner in this world and help folks out, even if it's not, you know, with us directly. We want to, you know, leverage our expertise to help in any way possible.
All right, you did that here today. So again, thank you. And last but certainly not least, General Cantwell, close us out.
Thanks so much, Don. I'm at the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies. We are hot and heavy in so many different research projects for air and space, national security issues, and I am currently working on a counter-UAS paper myself. If anyone has any inputs into that, please feel free to reach out to me. Thanks so much, Don.
All right, very good. All right, thank you all. We are out here.